My daughter refused to give me $10,000 for my cataract surgery, but spent $170,000 on an extravagant birthday dinner for her in-laws. Years later, I won a massive lottery prize. They showed up, but I shut the door in their faces. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought I'd have to beg my own daughter for help. At 64, I'd always been the one giving, never asking. But there I was, sitting across from Jovi in that upscale coffee shop she always insisted on, my hands trembling as I tried to explain what the doctor had told me. "Mom, you're being dramatic again," Jovi said, not even looking up from her phone. She was scrolling through something, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen. Cataracts aren't that serious. I felt my chest tighten. "Jovi, I can barely see anymore. Last week I almost walked into traffic because I couldn't make out the crossing signal." That got her attention, but not in the way I hoped. She rolled her eyes and finally set her phone down. "So wear your glasses." "Glasses don't fix cataracts, honey. I need surgery." My voice came out smaller than I intended. I hated sounding weak, especially to my own child. The coffee shop buzzed around us with the comfortable chatter of people living normal lives. Lives where daughters didn't make their mothers feel like burdens. I watched a young woman at the next table lean forward to listen intently as her elderly father spoke about his garden. The care in her eyes made my throat ache. "How much?" Jovi asked, her tone already suggesting the answer would be unacceptable. $10,000. I'd practiced saying that number, knowing how it would sound. It wasn't a small amount, but it wasn't impossible either. Not for someone who drove a BMW and lived in a house worth $500,000. Jovi's laugh was sharp and humorless. "10,000? Mom, do you think money just grows on trees? Brad and I have our own expenses, the mortgage, private school for the kids, car payments. We can't just hand out $10,000 because you decided you need surgery." The word "decided" hit me like a slap. As if I'd chosen to have my vision deteriorate. As if I was asking for a vacation instead of basic medical care. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The doctor says if I wait much longer, the damage could be permanent. I might go completely blind." Jovi picked up her latte and took a long sip, studying me over the rim. "Have you looked into payment plans? Medical financing? There are options, Mom. You can't expect us to solve all your problems." All my problems. As if I'd been a constant burden instead of the woman who worked 3 jobs to put her through college. The woman who gave up my own dreams so she could have hers. "I raised you by myself after your father left," I said quietly. "I never missed a single one of your soccer games, even when I had to leave work early. I took out loans I'm still paying off to send you to that private college you wanted so badly. That was your choice," Jovi said, her voice cold. "I never asked you to do any of that." The words hung in the air between us like poison. I felt something inside me crack, a hairline fracture in whatever was left of my heart. She was right in a way. I had chosen to sacrifice for her. I'd thought it was what mothers did. I thought love meant putting your child's needs before your own, always. "Maybe you should talk to Medicaid," she continued, checking her watch. "There have to be programs for people in your situation." My situation. I wanted to tell her that my situation was being the daughter of parents who died young, leaving me nothing. My situation was marrying a man who walked out when she was 8, taking half our savings with him. My situation was working as a store clerk for 40 years because I spent my college money on her childhood instead. But I said nothing. I just nodded and gathered my purse. "I should go," I said, standing up. My legs felt unsteady, whether from age or emotion, I couldn't tell. Jovi was already back on her phone. "Okay, Mom. Let me know what you figure out." I walked out of that coffee shop feeling smaller than I had in years. The autumn air was crisp, but I barely felt it. Everything seemed hazy, and not just because of my failing eyesight. It was as if the whole world had shifted, become unfamiliar. The drive home was terrifying. Every shadow could have been a car, every blur could have been a pedestrian. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, moving at a crawl, while other drivers honked their horns behind me. When I finally made it to my small apartment, I sat in my car for several minutes, staring at the building where I'd lived alone for the past 15 years. It was nothing fancy, but it was clean and affordable. I'd always been proud of maintaining my independence, of not being the kind of elderly parent who became a burden. But maybe that's exactly what I was, a burden. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Jovi used to do her homework while I helped her with math problems after my long shifts. The same table where we'd planned her wedding, where I'd written check after check to make sure she had everything she wanted. I pulled out the estimate from Dr. Martinez's office and stared at the number again. $10,000 for cataract surgery on both eyes. It might as well have been $10 million. My savings account had exactly $2,300 in it. My monthly Social Security barely covered rent and groceries. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe Jovi had changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized how harsh she'd been. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Mrs. Harrison, this is Jennifer from Dr. Martinez's office. I'm calling to schedule your preoperative appointment." My heart sank. I need to call you back about that." "Oh," the woman's voice shifted, becoming more cautious. "Is there a problem with the scheduling?" "No, it's a financial issue. I need more time." There was a pause. "Mrs. Harrison, I don't want to pressure you, but Dr. Martinez did emphasize that waiting too long could result in permanent vision loss. Is there someone who might be able to help? Family, perhaps?" I closed my eyes, feeling tears threaten to spill over. I thought there was, but I was wrong. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment. I didn't turn on the lights partly because switching from light to dark was easier on my deteriorating vision, but mostly because the darkness felt appropriate. It matched the heaviness in my chest, the growing certainty that I was truly alone in this world. I'd always told myself that raising Jovi was the most important thing I'd ever do, that every sacrifice was worth it because I was building a relationship with someone who would care about me when I got older. Isn't that what families were supposed to be? People who showed up for each other when it mattered? But as I sat there in the dark, I realized I'd been lying to myself for years. Jovi hadn't just become selfish overnight. The signs had been there for a long time. The way she only called when she needed something. The way she talked about money as if it was the most important thing in the world. The way she'd grown embarrassed of my modest lifestyle, always suggesting I upgrade myself to fit into her world. I should have seen it coming. But love, especially a mother's love, has a way of making you blind to uncomfortable truths. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was going blind literally, but I'd been blind figuratively for years. 3 weeks had passed since my conversation with Jovi, and my vision was getting worse by the day. I'd started using a magnifying glass to read my mail, and even simple tasks like cooking had become dangerous. Just yesterday, I'd reached for what I thought was the salt and accidentally grabbed the sugar instead. The ruined soup wasn't the problem. It was the realization that I could just as easily have grabbed something harmful. I was at my neighbor Mrs. Chen's apartment, borrowing her computer to research free clinics. My own laptop had become useless. The screen was just a blur of shapes and colors that made no sense to my failing eyes. Mrs. Chen, bless her heart, had insisted on helping me navigate the internet. "Here, Eileen," she said, pulling up a chair beside hers. "I found a clinic about 30 miles away that offers sliding-scale payments for seniors." I squinted at the screen, trying to make out the details. "What kind of wait time are we talking about?" "It says here, 6 to 8 months for non-emergency procedures." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle, but I could hear the concern underneath. 6 to 8 months. I might be completely blind by then. Mrs. Chen was scrolling through the clinic's website when she suddenly stopped. "Oh my," she said, her voice changing. "Eileen, isn't this your daughter?" I leaned closer to the computer screen, straining to see what she was looking at. The colors and shapes swam together, making it impossible for me to make sense of what was there. "What is it?" I asked. "It's a news article," Mrs. Chen said slowly. "From the society page of the newspaper. There's a big photo spread here." She began reading aloud. and with each word, I felt my world tilt a little more off its axis. Local couple Bradley and Jovi Morrison threw an extravagant 70th birthday celebration for Bradley's parents at the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel. The black tie event, which cost an estimated $170,000, featured a 7-course meal prepared by celebrity chef Marcus Williams, entertainment by the City Symphony Orchestra, and decorations that transformed the ballroom into a replica of the couple's honeymoon destination in Tuscany. The words hit me like physical blows. $170,000. I couldn't breathe. There's more, Mrs. Chen continued, her voice growing smaller. It says here that Jovi Morrison told reporters, "We believe in celebrating the people we love. No expense is too great when it comes to family. No expense is too great when it comes to family." I must have made a sound because Mrs. Chen stopped reading and turned to look at me. "Eileen, are you all right?" I wasn't all right. I would never be all right again. Can you read the date of that article?" I managed to ask. October 15th. October 15th. 2 weeks after Jovi had told me she couldn't afford to help with my $10,000 surgery. 2 weeks after she told me that money didn't grow on trees and that I needed to figure out my own problems. "Mrs. Chen," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "could you do me a favor? Could you print this article for me?" She hesitated. "Are you sure you want to?" "Please." I heard the printer whir to life, and a few moments later, Mrs. Chen pressed the papers into my hands. I couldn't read them, but I held them anyway, feeling their weight like evidence of a crime. The walk back to my apartment felt endless. Every step was weighted with the crushing realization of what my daughter really thought of me. $170,000 for her husband's parents, people she'd known for maybe 12 years. $0 for the woman who'd raised her, sacrificed everything for her, loved her unconditionally for 35 years. Once inside my apartment, I called my friend Margaret, the only person I trusted to help me understand what I was feeling. "Margaret," I said when she answered, "I need you to come over and bring your reading glasses." She must have heard something in my voice because she didn't ask questions. "I'll be right there." 20 minutes later, Margaret was sitting on my couch, reading the newspaper article aloud. Her voice grew more incredulous with each detail. "A ice sculpture of the couple's dog? Flowers imported from Italy? Custom champagne flutes with their names engraved in gold?" Margaret looked up at me over her glasses. "Eileen, this is obscene." I was sitting in my armchair, holding a cup of tea I couldn't taste. She told me they couldn't afford $10,000 for my surgery. When was this party? 2 weeks after she refused to help me. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that cut right to the heart of it. "This wasn't about money, was it?" "No, it wasn't about money. If it had been about money, I could have understood. People have financial struggles, unexpected expenses, but this was about worth, about who deserved help and who didn't, about who mattered and who was expendable." "There's another article here," Margaret said, her voice careful, "from last month, about a charity auction they attended. It says they bid $15,000 on a weekend getaway to Napa Valley. $15,000, more than my entire surgery, spent on a weekend vacation." I set my teacup down with shaking hands. "I feel like I don't know her at all." "Maybe you don't," Margaret said softly. "Maybe you never did." After Margaret left, I sat alone in my apartment as the evening shadows grew longer. The printed articles lay on my coffee table, words I couldn't read, but whose meaning was burned into my memory. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that Jovi and I had a relationship built on love and mutual respect. But respect was a two-way street, wasn't it? And love, real love, didn't come with conditions and price tags. I remembered the last time I'd visited Jovi's house, about 6 months ago. She'd seemed embarrassed when I complimented her new furniture, quickly changing the subject when I asked about the cost. At the time, I'd thought she was being modest. Now I realized she probably didn't want me to know how much money they had while I was struggling to make ends meet. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Jovi's number. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was bright, cheerful, normal, as if she hadn't just spent more on a single party than I'd earned in the last 3 years. "Hello, Jovi." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I was just calling to check on you. How are you feeling?" How was I feeling? I was feeling betrayed. I was feeling like a fool. I was feeling like I'd wasted 35 years of my life loving someone who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. "My vision is getting worse," I said. "Oh," a pause. "Have you looked into those programs we talked about? Medicaid or whatever? Those programs we talked about." As if she'd been helpful instead of dismissive. "I'm working on it," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "Good. Well, I should go. Brad's parents are coming over for dinner, and I still need to get to the grocery store." Brad's parents, the people worth $170,000. "Jovi," I said before she could hang up, "did you have a nice time at the party last month?" There was a long silence. "What party?" "The birthday party. For Brad's parents." Another silence, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was cooler, more guarded. Who told you about that?" "It was in the newspaper, the society page." "Mom, that wasn't. It wasn't as expensive as they made it sound. You know how those reporters exaggerate. $170,000 seems pretty specific for an exaggeration." "Mom," her voice was sharp now, all pretense of warmth gone. "That's none of your business. That money came from Brad's bonus. We had every right to spend it however we wanted." "Every right." Yes, she did have that right. But she also had the right to help her mother, and she'd chosen not to. "You're right," I said quietly. "It's not my business." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment, feeling something I'd never felt before toward my daughter. Clarity. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was seeing Jovi exactly as she was, not through the rose-colored glasses of maternal love, but with clear, brutal honesty. She wasn't the person I'd raised her to be, or maybe this was exactly who I'd raised her to be, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. I was on my own. I always had been, really. I'd just been too blind to see it. The irony was almost funny. Almost. 6 months had passed since I discovered the truth about Jovi's party, and my world had shrunk to the size of my small apartment. My vision had deteriorated to the point where I could barely make out shapes and shadows. I'd had to give up driving after nearly hitting a mailbox I couldn't see, and simple tasks like grocery shopping had become impossible without help. Mrs. Chen had become my lifeline, driving me to doctor appointments and helping with errands. The free clinic had finally scheduled my surgery, but it wouldn't be for another 4 months. 4 months that I wasn't sure I had, with my vision fading more each day. It was a Tuesday morning in March when everything changed. I was sitting at my kitchen table, trying to eat breakfast with hands that shook from a combination of age and frustration, when Mrs. Chen knocked on my door. "Eileen, I have something for you," she called through the door. I made my way slowly to the entrance, using the walls for guidance. When I opened the door, Mrs. Chen pressed something into my hands. "What is it?" I asked, running my fingers over what felt like a piece of paper. "It's a lottery ticket," she said, her voice excited. "The jackpot is up to $8.2 million. I bought one for myself and thought, why not get one for you too? Consider it an early birthday present." I tried to smile, though the gesture felt hollow. "Mrs. Chen, you know I don't believe in gambling." "It's not gambling when it's a gift," she said firmly. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen? You're out nothing, and maybe, just maybe, something good will happen for once." I held the ticket in my hands, feeling its smooth surface. "When is the drawing?" "Tonight at 11. I'll check the numbers for you tomorrow morning if you'd like." After she left, I set the ticket on my kitchen counter and forgot about it. I had bigger concerns than fantasy winnings. My latest medical bill had arrived, and even with my limited vision, I could make out the alarming total. The preliminary tests for my surgery had cost nearly $2,000, money I didn't have. That evening, I went to bed early, exhausted from another day of navigating a world that seemed increasingly hostile to someone with failing eyesight. I didn't think about the lottery ticket at all. The next morning, Mrs. Chen's frantic knocking woke me at 7 o'clock. Eileen, open the door. I stumbled to the entrance, my heart racing. Mrs. Chen sounded panicked, and my first thought was that something terrible had happened. What's wrong? I asked as I fumbled with the locks. Where's your ticket? Where did you put the lottery ticket? Her voice was shrill with excitement, but I couldn't understand why. It's on the kitchen counter, I think. Mrs. Chen, what's happening? I heard her rush past me, and then there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. Mrs. Chen? I called out, alarmed. Eileen, she said, and her voice was barely a whisper. Sit down. Why? What's wrong? Just sit down. Please. I made my way to my armchair, my hands trembling. You're scaring me. Eileen, Mrs. Chen said slowly. You won. Won what? The lottery. You won the lottery. The words didn't make sense. They seemed to float in the air between us, meaningless sounds that couldn't possibly apply to me. That's not possible, I said. I've checked the numbers 5 times. Your ticket matches every single number. Eileen, you won $8.2 million. $8.2 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like something that belonged in a movie or a dream. Not in my small apartment. Not in my small life. Are you sure? I whispered. I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I sat there in my chair, trying to process what Mrs. Chen had just told me. $8.2 million. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having. More money than most people would see in several lifetimes. What do I do? I asked. First, you call the lottery office. Then you find yourself a good lawyer and an accountant. But Eileen, Mrs. Chen's voice became serious. Before you do any of that, you need to think very carefully about who you tell. She was right, of course. Money changed things. Money changed people. And I'd already learned that lesson the hard way. I don't want anyone to know, I said suddenly. Not yet. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment. Not even Jovi? The sound of my daughter's name sent a sharp pain through my chest. Jovi, who had refused to help when I was desperate. Jovi, who had spent more on a single party than my surgery would have cost. Jovi, who saw me as a burden, an inconvenience, someone whose problems were her own fault. Especially not Jovi, I said. Over the next few days, Mrs. Chen helped me navigate the process of claiming my winnings. The lawyer I hired was a kind woman named Patricia Reeves who specialized in sudden wealth cases. She explained that after taxes, I would receive approximately $4.8 million. $4.8 million. Even after taxes, it was an unimaginable amount. Mrs. Harrison, Patricia said during our first meeting, I always advise my clients to take time before making any major decisions about their money. Sudden wealth can be overwhelming, and people often make choices they later regret. I nodded, though I'd already made one decision. I was going to wait. I was going to see how my family treated me now, while they still thought I was the same struggling woman who'd begged for help 6 months ago. I'd also recommend not telling anyone about your winnings for at least 6 months, Patricia continued. Give yourself time to adjust, to make plans. You'd be amazed how many people suddenly become your best friend when they learn you've won the lottery. I thought about Jovi, about how she'd dismissed my need for help so casually, about the $170,000 party and the $15,000 weekend getaway, about all the times she'd made me feel small and inconvenient. That won't be a problem, I told Patricia. The first thing I did with my winnings was schedule my cataract surgery with a private ophthalmologist. Dr. Williams was expensive, but he could fit me in within 2 weeks instead of 4 months. When I told Mrs. Chen about the appointment, she asked how I was paying for it. I used the emergency fund I've been saving, I lied smoothly. It wasn't really a lie. The lottery money was an emergency fund of sorts. The surgery went perfectly. Within days of having the bandages removed, I could see clearly for the first time in over a year. Colors were vibrant again, faces were sharp, and the world had regained its definition. But more than my physical vision had been restored. I was seeing everything with new clarity. I was seeing my life as it really was, not as I'd pretended it to be. During my recovery, Jovi called twice. Both times, she asked perfunctory questions about my health and seemed eager to get off the phone. She never asked about my surgery or how I was managing financially. She never offered to visit or help with my recovery. On the second call, she mentioned that she and Brad were planning a European vacation. "That sounds expensive," I said, curious to see how she'd respond. "Oh, it is. $15,000 for 10 days. But Brad got another bonus and we decided we deserved it. We work so hard, you know." $15,000 for 10 days. The same amount they'd spent on that Napa Valley weekend. More than my original surgery estimate. Money they had but claimed they couldn't spare when their mother needed help. "That sounds lovely," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. After we hung up, I sat in my sunny kitchen, able to see every detail clearly for the first time in months. The stack of lottery information Patricia had given me sat on my counter, along with the bank statements showing my new balance. $4.8 million, earning interest every day. I could have called Jovi right then. I could have told her about the money, watched her attitude transform, seen how quickly she'd remember that she had a mother who might be worth caring about. But I didn't. I wanted to see how much longer this would go on, how long my own daughter would continue to treat me like I was worthless. It became a kind of experiment. Every interaction with Jovi was a test, and so far she was failing spectacularly. 2 weeks after my surgery, she called to tell me about a charity auction she'd attended. "We bid on this amazing art piece," she said excitedly. $25,000, but it's going to look perfect in our living room. And it's for a good cause. So it's practically tax-deductible. $25,000 on art. 2.5 times the cost of my surgery. "That's wonderful, dear," I said. "I'm sure it will be beautiful." "Oh, it will be. I'll send you a picture, though I don't know if you'll be able to see it clearly with your eyesight." She had no idea that my vision was now perfect, better than it had been in years. She'd never bothered to ask about my surgery or my recovery. As far as she knew, I was still struggling with failing eyesight and mounting medical bills. "I'd love to see it," I said. That night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, seeing my reflection clearly for the first time in months. I looked different somehow, not just because I could see again, but because something fundamental had shifted inside me. The desperate, pleading woman who had begged her daughter for help was gone. In her place was someone harder, clearer, more certain about what she deserved. I had money now, more money than I'd ever dreamed of. But more importantly, I had clarity. I could see exactly who my daughter was and who she wasn't, and I was beginning to form a plan. For 3 months, I lived with my secret, watching my daughter continue to treat me like a burden while she spent money like water. The calls came less frequently now, usually only when she needed something or had news about another expensive purchase to share. I began to understand that these conversations weren't really about connecting with me. They were about showing off, about making sure I knew how well she was doing compared to my struggles. Only I wasn't struggling anymore. I just hadn't told her that. It was a Thursday afternoon in June when everything changed. I was in my garden, planting tomatoes with my newly restored vision, when I heard voices from the neighboring yard. Mrs. Patterson, who lived behind me, was talking to someone over the fence. "Oh yes, Eileen won the lottery," Mrs. Patterson was saying. $8.2 million, can you imagine? I saw her name in the paper last week when they published the list of recent winners. My heart stopped. I'd asked Patricia to keep my name out of the press for as long as possible, but apparently that grace period had ended. I dropped my trowel and listened more carefully. The poor woman had been struggling so much with her eyesight, Mrs. Patterson continued. Her daughter never helped her, you know. Never even visited during her recovery. But I guess that might change now. I sat back on my heels, dirt still clinging to my hands, and realized that my experiment was about to end. Word would spread through the neighborhood, as it always did, and eventually it would reach Jovi. I was right. It took exactly 4 hours. The phone rang at 6:30 that evening. Jovi's name appeared on the caller ID, and I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Mom." Jovi's voice was breathless, excited, completely different from the dismissive tone she'd been using for months. "Mom, I just heard the most incredible news." "Oh, what news is that?" "Mrs. Patterson's sister called her cousin, who called her daughter, who called me. She said you won the lottery. Is that true?" I could hear the desperation underneath her excitement, the barely contained greed that she was trying to dress up as concern. "Yes," I said simply, "it's true." "Mom, why didn't you tell me? This is amazing. This changes everything." "Everything. Yes, I supposed it did change everything, just not in the way she thought it would. Does it?" I asked. "Of course it does. Oh my God, Mom, you must be so overwhelmed. You probably don't even know where to start with all that money. Listen, Brad and I can drive over right now. We can help you figure out what to do, help you make plans. You shouldn't handle something this big alone." Alone. The word was laughable. I'd been handling everything alone for months while she spent more on art and vacations than she'd ever offered to spend on my medical care. "That's very kind of you, Jovi, but I've already made arrangements. I have a lawyer, an accountant. All of that is taken care of." There was a pause. I could practically hear her recalculating. "Well, that's smart. Very responsible. But still, this is such big news. We should celebrate. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? I'll make your favorite meal." My favorite meal. I couldn't remember the last time Jovi had asked what my favorite meal was, let alone offered to make it. "I'm pretty busy this weekend," I said. "Busy?" Her voice sharpened slightly. "Busy with what?" "I'm looking at houses. Now that I can afford it, I'm thinking of moving somewhere nicer." Another pause, longer this time. "Houses? Mom, that's such a big decision. Are you sure you should rush into something like that? Maybe you should stay put for a while. Let the dust settle. Stay put. Stay in my modest apartment where she could keep me contained, manageable, convenient. Actually, I've been thinking that a change might be good for me," I said. "A fresh start." "A fresh start?" Jovi's voice was getting higher, more strained. "Mom, you can't just uproot your whole life. What about your friends? Your routine? What about family?" Family, there it was. What about family, Jovi? "Well, I mean, if you move too far away, we won't be able to see each other as often." I almost laughed. We hadn't seen each other in person for over 4 months. She'd never once visited during my surgery recovery, never once offered to help with groceries or errands when I couldn't see well enough to drive. "We don't see each other very often now," I pointed out. That's different. We've both been so busy. But now that your situation has improved, we can spend more time together." Now that my situation had improved, not now that she had time, or now that she wanted to make an effort, now that I had money, "I should go," I said. "I have some calls to make." "Wait, Mom, don't hang up. I feel like we're not communicating very well. Maybe I should come over tonight. We could talk in person, figure out how to move forward with all this." How to move forward. As if my lottery winnings were a family project she needed to be involved in. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "Why not?" "Mom, I'm your daughter. We should be sharing this moment together." "Jovi," I said, my voice growing colder. "Where were you when I needed cataract surgery?" Silence. "Where were you when I was nearly blind and couldn't afford medical care?" "Mom, that's not fair. Our financial situation was, you spent $170,000 on a party for Brad's parents." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "How do you know about that?" she asked finally. "It was in the newspaper, the society page. You were quoted saying that no expense is too great when it comes to family." "Mom, that was different. That money came from Brad's bonus. Yes, you told me that. Just like the $15,000 you spent on Napa Valley and the $25,000 on art last month." I could hear her breathing getting faster. "You were watching me," I said quietly. "All those months when I was struggling, you were watching me fail and doing nothing. You had money. You had plenty of money. But you chose not to help." That's not. I mean, we couldn't just, but you could just spend it on everything else. Mom, please, let's not dwell on the past. What matters is now, right? What matters is that you're okay, that you have this amazing opportunity. What matters is that I know exactly who you are now. The words hung between us like a verdict. What's that supposed to mean? Jovi asked, her voice small. It means that winning the lottery didn't change anything, Jovi. It just showed me what was already there. I hung up before she could respond. Within an hour, my phone started ringing again. First Jovi, then Brad, then Jovi again. I let them all go to voicemail. The first message was Jovi crying, saying she was sorry, that she'd made mistakes but wanted to fix them. The second was Brad, his voice carefully controlled, saying they were concerned about me and wanted to make sure I was making good decisions. The third was Jovi again, angry this time, accusing me of being vindictive and holding grudges. I deleted them all without listening to the end. The next day, they showed up at my apartment. I saw them through my window, Jovi pacing on the sidewalk while Brad sat in their car, talking on his phone. They'd been there for 20 minutes, ringing the buzzer and calling my name. Finally, Jovi shouted up at my window, "Mom, I know you're in there. Your car is here." I opened the window just wide enough to speak through. "What do you want, Jovi?" "I want to talk to you. I want to explain." "Explain what?" "Everything. Mom, please, just let us come up. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking for." I looked down at her upturned face, at the desperation in her eyes. This was what I'd wanted to see, wasn't it? The mask finally slipping, revealing who she really was underneath. But looking at her now, I felt no satisfaction, only sadness. "I can hear you fine from here," I said. "Mom, please, people are starting to stare." People were indeed starting to notice the commotion. Mrs. Patterson was peering through her curtains, and the teenagers from down the street had stopped their skateboarding to watch. "Then maybe you should lower your voice," I said. Jovi looked around, realizing she'd drawn an audience. Her face flushed red, but she didn't leave. "Okay, fine. We'll do this here." She took a deep breath and looked up at me. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed help. I'm sorry I was selfish, but that doesn't mean we can't fix this. That doesn't mean we can't be a family again." "We were never a family, Jovi. Not really. I was just a convenience to you." "That's not true," her voice cracked. "I love you. Do you? Or do you love my $8.2 million? The question hit its mark. I could see it in the way her face changed, the way her shoulders slumped. "It's not about the money," she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. "Isn't it? When's the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When's the last time you visited when you didn't need something? When's the last time you treated me like I mattered?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. We both knew she couldn't answer those questions. "I want to change," she said finally. "I want to be better." I stared down at her, this woman who had been my whole world for so many years, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, who had grown into someone I barely recognized. "I believe you might want that," I said sadly. "But wanting and doing are different things. And I'm tired, Jovi. I'm 64 years old, and I'm tired of being disappointed by the people who are supposed to love me." She started crying then, real tears that ran down her face and dripped onto the sidewalk. "Please don't give up on me," she whispered. But it was too late for please, too late for promises and good intentions. She'd had 35 years to show me who she was, and she'd chosen to show me someone who only cared when it was convenient. "Goodbye, Jovi," I said, and closed the window. They stayed outside for another hour, but I didn't look again. Eventually, I heard their car start and drive away. The silence that followed was the most peaceful I'd felt in years. For 2 weeks after the scene outside my apartment, I heard nothing from Jovi or Brad. The silence should have been a relief, but instead it felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. I knew my daughter well enough to know she wouldn't give up easily, especially not with $8.2 million at stake. I was right to be worried. On a sweltering Tuesday morning in July, Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with a concerned expression. "Eileen," she said, There are people asking questions about you in the neighborhood. What kind of questions? A woman came to my door yesterday claiming to be your niece. She said she was worried about you, that you'd been acting strangely since winning the lottery. She wanted to know if you seemed mentally competent, if you were making rational decisions. My blood ran cold. I didn't have any nieces, and Mrs. Chen knew that. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know any of your family members and that she should speak to you directly if she had concerns. But Eileen, she seemed to know things about you. Personal things. That afternoon, I received a call from Patricia, my lawyer. Eileen, I need to ask you something, and please be honest. Have you been experiencing any memory problems? Any confusion or disorientation? No, I said, alarmed. Why would you ask that? Because I received a very concerning call today from someone claiming to be your daughter. She's suggesting that you may not be mentally competent to handle your financial affairs. She's asking about the process for having a legal guardian appointed. A legal guardian. My own daughter was trying to have me declared incompetent so she could control my money. Patricia, I need you to understand something. I am completely mentally sound. My daughter is trying to manipulate the system because I won't give her access to my lottery winnings. I believe you, Patricia said. But Eileen, if she pursues this, it could get very ugly. She could force you to undergo psychiatric evaluations, drag this out in court. Even if you win, which you would, the process would be humiliating and expensive. That evening, as I sat in my apartment trying to process what was happening, there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I could see Jovi, but she wasn't alone. Brad was there, along with a woman I didn't recognize. I opened the door but kept the chain latch engaged. What do you want, Jovi? Mom, we need to talk. This is Dr. Sarah Chen. She's a psychologist and she's here to help. Dr. Chen stepped forward. Mrs. Harrison, your daughter has expressed some concerns about your mental state. I'm here to conduct an informal assessment, just to make sure you're doing okay. I didn't agree to any assessment, I said firmly. Mom, please, Jovi said, her voice taking on that wheedling tone I remembered from her childhood. We're just worried about you. Winning this much money can be overwhelming. Sometimes people need help processing it. The only thing I need help processing is how my own daughter could be so selfish. Brad spoke for the first time. Eileen, you have to understand. We're concerned about your judgment. You've been isolating yourself, refusing to see family, making major financial decisions without consulting anyone. I'm not required to consult anyone about my money. Mom, Jovi said, you're not thinking clearly. This whole thing with the lottery has changed you. You're not the same person. She was right about that. I wasn't the same person. The old Eileen would have given in by now, would have opened the door and let them manipulate her into compliance. But that woman was gone. I'm exactly the same person, I said through the gap in the door. I'm just not desperate anymore. Dr. Chen pulled out a small recorder. Mrs. Harrison, would you mind answering a few questions? Just basic orientation questions to establish. I mind very much, I interrupted. And unless you have some legal authority to be here, I suggest you leave. Mom, don't be difficult, Jovi snapped. And for a moment, her mask slipped completely. We're trying to help you. No, you're trying to help yourselves. I started to close the door, but Jovi put her foot in the gap. Wait, Mom, if you won't talk to Dr. Chen, at least talk to me. Please, I'm your daughter. Something in her voice made me pause. She sounded desperate but also angry. Dangerous. 5 minutes, I said. Just you. They wait downstairs. After Brad and Dr. Chen reluctantly left, I let Jovi into my apartment. She looked around with sharp, calculating eyes, as if she were appraising everything. Nice place, she said. Have you redecorated? What do you really want, Jovi? She sat down on my couch without being invited. I want my mother back. I'm right here. No, you're not. The mother I knew was kind and generous. She cared about family. She would have shared good fortune with the people she loved. The mother you knew was a fool, I said quietly. She gave everything she had to a daughter who never appreciated any of it. Jovi's face flushed. That's not fair. I was grateful. Were you? When was the last time you thanked me for anything? When was the last time you acknowledged that I sacrificed my entire life so you could have yours? I didn't ask you to sacrifice anything. No, you just took it all and complained when there wasn't more. We stared at each other across my small living room, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not love, not even greed. It was rage. Pure, undiluted rage that I dared to stand up to her. You know what I think? Jovi said, her voice low and venomous. I think the money has made you paranoid. I think you're having some kind of breakdown and you're taking it out on the people who love you. The people who love me? Yes, your family, the people who've been there for you your whole life. I almost laughed. Jovi, you haven't been there for me in years. You've been absent, dismissive, cruel. I've been busy. I have a husband, children, a life. And I had nothing. I was nothing. Just a burden you had to tolerate. She stood up abruptly. You're being ridiculous, dramatic. This whole victim act is getting old, Mom. Victim act? Yes, poor Eileen. Nobody loves her. Nobody helps her. Well, maybe if you hadn't been so needy all the time, people would want to be around you more. The words hit like physical blows. This was what she really thought of me. Not just that I was inconvenient, but that I deserved to be abandoned. Get out, I said quietly. What? Get out of my apartment. Now. Mom, I didn't mean… Yes, you did. You meant every word. And now I want you to leave. Jovi's facade cracked completely. Fine, but you should know that I'm not giving up. If you won't be reasonable, I'll find other ways to make sure you don't squander everything on your self-pity. Is that a threat? It's a promise. That money should be securing my children's future, not funding your spite. There it was. The truth she'd been dancing around for weeks. She didn't think the money was mine. She thought it belonged to her family, that I was just holding it temporarily until she could figure out how to get it. Your children's future was never my responsibility, I said. I'm your only child. Of course it's your responsibility. No, Jovi. My responsibility was to raise you to be a decent human being, and I failed. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. How can you say that to me? Because it's true. I raised someone selfish and entitled and cruel. Someone who thinks love comes with conditions and price tags. Someone who would try to have her own mother declared incompetent for money. I never. You called my lawyer. You brought a psychologist to my door. You've been canvassing the neighborhood, trying to build a case that I'm mentally unfit. Jovi's face went white. She hadn't expected me to know about all of that. You don't understand, she said weakly. The money. It's changing you. No, I said. The money showed me who we both really are, and I don't like what I see. She was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of a child throwing a tantrum because she couldn't have what she wanted. I hate you, she whispered. I know, I said sadly. You probably always have. You just needed me too much to admit it before. She stood there for a moment, shaking with anger and tears, looking like the spoiled child she'd never stopped being. This isn't over, she said finally. Yes, it is. After she left, I called Patricia and told her everything that had happened. Eileen, I'm going to be blunt with you. Your daughter is going to keep escalating this until she either gets what she wants or you stop her. How do I stop her? By making it clear that there are consequences for her actions. Right now, she thinks she can harass you without any real repercussions. We need to change that calculation. What are you suggesting? A restraining order. Documentation of her attempts to have you declared incompetent. A clear legal boundary that if she crosses it, she'll face serious consequences. I thought about the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who would bring me dandelions she'd picked from the yard. Where had that child gone? When had she become this stranger who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to money she felt entitled to? Do it, I said. Do whatever you need to do to make this stop. That night, I sat in my apartment and mourned the daughter I thought I'd had. Not the one who had just threatened me, but the one I'd loved and sacrificed for, the one who had never really existed except in my own hopeful imagination. Tomorrow, I would start building a new life, one where I was valued for who I was, not what I could provide, one where love wasn't conditional on what I could give. But tonight, I grieved for the family I'd never really had. 6 months after I closed the door on Jovi for the final time, I was standing in the kitchen of my new house, watching the sunrise paint the mountains golden through my window. The restraining order Patricia had obtained had done its job. Jovi had made no further attempts to contact me directly, though I occasionally heard through Mrs. Chen that she was still telling anyone who would listen that I'd had some kind of mental breakdown. Let her talk. The people whose opinions mattered knew the truth. My new home was a modest 3-bedroom house in Asheville, North Carolina, nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains about 4 hours from my old life. I'd chosen it not for its size or prestige, but for its peace. The previous owners had been an elderly couple who'd filled the garden with roses and built a screened porch where I could sit with my morning coffee and watch deer graze in the meadow beyond. It was nothing like the mansion Jovi had probably expected me to buy, but it was perfect for me. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the front window, I could see a familiar figure on my porch. Margaret, my friend from back home, holding a covered dish and grinning. "You didn't think you could escape me that easily, did you?" she said when I opened the door. Margaret had been my anchor during the worst of it, the one person who'd supported my decision to cut ties with Jovi completely. When I'd told her I was moving away, she'd announced that she was retiring and might just follow me to the mountains. "I brought you a casserole and some gossip," she said, bustling into my kitchen like she'd lived there for years. "I can always use both," I said, accepting the warm dish. "What's the news from the old neighborhood?" "Well," Margaret said, settling into one of my kitchen chairs, "Mrs. Patterson's nephew visited last week. Apparently, Jovi came by her house again, still trying to convince people you're not mentally competent. Mrs. Patterson told her that if she showed up again, she'd call the police." I shook my head. "She's still at it?" "Oh, yes. But here's the interesting part. Word is that she and Brad are having financial troubles, something about bad investments and overextending themselves. The house might be going up for sale." I felt a twinge of something that might have been satisfaction, but it was quickly overwhelmed by sadness. Even now, even after everything, a part of me wished things could have been different. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Are you really?" "Yes. Not because I think they deserve my money, but because I still remember the little girl who used to help me bake cookies. I mourn for that child, even if she grew up to be someone I don't recognize." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping coffee and watching a red cardinal at my bird feeder. "Do you ever regret it?" Margaret asked finally. "Walking away from her completely?" I considered the question. "I regret that it was necessary. But no, I don't regret the choice itself. I spent 35 years trying to earn love from someone who is incapable of giving it. I'm too old to waste whatever time I have left on that kind of heartbreak." After Margaret left, I drove into town for my weekly volunteer shift at the Literacy Center. It was one of the first things I'd done after moving to Asheville, found ways to use my time and resources to help others who actually needed it. At the center, I worked with adults who were learning to read, many of them older people who'd fallen through the cracks of the education system. There was Maria, a 60-year-old woman who'd never learned because she'd been working in fields since she was 8. There was James, a veteran who'd struggled with dyslexia his whole life, but was determined to read bedtime stories to his grandchildren. These people appreciated what I had to offer. Not my money, but my time, my patience, my encouragement. With them, I felt useful in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Miss Eileen," Maria said as we worked through a picture book together, "you're so patient with me. My own daughter, she gets frustrated when I can't read the bills or the medicine bottles." I squeezed her hand. "Learning takes time, Maria. There's no shame in that." As I drove home that afternoon, I thought about the irony. Here was Maria, whose daughter was impatient with her struggles, while my daughter had been impatient with my needs. The difference was that Maria's daughter still showed up, still tried to help, even when she was frustrated. She didn't abandon her mother when things got difficult. That evening, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I wrote a will. Patricia had been encouraging me to do it since I'd won the lottery, but I'd resisted, partly because it felt too much like giving up, and partly because I didn't know what to do about Jovi. Did I leave her something? Nothing at all? How do you handle the legacy of a relationship that had caused so much pain? In the end, I kept it simple. A modest trust fund for Jovi's children, my grandchildren I'd never been allowed to know, to be administered by someone other than their parents. The money would be there for their education, for true emergencies, but not for vacations or parties or status symbols. The bulk of my estate would go to causes I believed in. The literacy center where I volunteered, a fund for elderly people who couldn't afford medical care, a scholarship program for first-generation college students who, like I had been, were trying to build something better for their children. As I signed the documents, I felt a sense of completion. This was how I wanted to be remembered, not as someone who'd been bitter or vindictive, but as someone who'd chosen to use her good fortune to make the world a little better. A year after moving to Asheville, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my garden, tending to the roses the previous owners had planted, when I heard a car in my driveway. Through the hedge, I could see a young woman getting out of a small sedan, looking nervous and uncertain. She was pretty, with dark hair and familiar eyes. It took me a moment to realize who she was. "Excuse me," she called out. "Are you Eileen Harrison?" "Yes," I said, setting down my pruning shears and walking toward the fence. I'm Jessica, Jovi's daughter, your granddaughter." My heart stopped. Jessica was 22 now, a college senior according to the last information I'd had. She looked so much like Jovi had at that age, but there was something different in her expression, a wariness that reminded me painfully of myself. "Hello, Jessica," I said softly. "I hope it's okay that I came. I know there's been problems between you and my parents." "How did you find me?" "It wasn't hard. Small town, and you volunteer at places. People talk." She hesitated. Could we maybe talk? Just for a few minutes?" I opened the gate and invited her into my garden. We sat on the bench beneath my apple tree, both of us uncertain how to begin. "My mom told me you had some kind of breakdown after winning the lottery," Jessica said finally. "She said you became paranoid and cut off the whole family. Is that what you think happened?" Jessica was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know what to think. All I know is that my whole life you were never around. Mom said you were too busy, that you didn't really care about having grandchildren." The lie hit me like a physical blow. "Jessica, I sent birthday cards and Christmas presents every year until your mother told me to stop. I called and asked to visit, but I was always told you were too busy or too young or it wasn't a good time." Jessica's face went pale. She never told me that." "I have copies of the letters I sent if you'd like to see them someday." We talked for 2 hours. I told her about the surgery I'd needed, about asking for help and being refused, about the party that cost more than my medical care. I told her about the restraining order and why it had been necessary. Jessica listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each revelation. "I had no idea," she said finally, "about any of it. Mom always made it sound like you were the one who didn't want a relationship. I wanted a relationship very much, but not on terms that required me to accept being treated as less than." When Jessica left, she hugged me, the first hug I'd received from a family member in over 2 years. It was tentative, uncertain, but real. "Can I come back sometime?" she asked. "You're always welcome here," I said. 6 months later, Jessica graduated from college. I wasn't invited to the ceremony, but she called me afterward to tell me about it. She'd majored in social work, she said, because she wanted to help people who didn't have anyone else to advocate for them. "I think I understand now," she told me over the phone, "why you did what you did. I've been watching how my parents treat people who can't give them anything, and it's not good, Grandma Eileen." Grandma Eileen. The title I'd never thought I'd hear filled my chest with warmth. Jessica started visiting regularly, driving up from Charlotte where she'd found a job with a nonprofit. She brought her boyfriend once, a kind young man who worked with veterans. They treated me with genuine affection, not the calculated courtesy I'd grown used to from Jovi. On my 66th birthday, Jessica threw me a small party. Just her boyfriend, Margaret, and a few friends I'd made in Asheville. We sat on my screened porch eating cake and watching the sunset paint the mountains purple. "Thank you," I told Jessica as we cleaned up afterward. "For what?" "For giving me hope that I did something right, even if it took a generation to show." She hugged me then, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The love of family, freely given without conditions or expectations. That night, as I sat in my quiet house surrounded by the life I'd built for myself, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain of Jovi's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been freeing. It had forced me to stop accepting crumbs and start demanding the full meal of human dignity. I was 66 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. I had a granddaughter who called me just to talk, friends who invited me places because they enjoyed my company, and a community where I felt useful and appreciated. The lottery money had made all of this possible, but it wasn't the money that had changed my life. It was the clarity. The ability to see relationships as they really were, not as I desperately wanted them to be. Sometimes, I still thought about Jovi. I wondered if she ever regretted the choices she'd made, if she ever missed having a mother who would have loved her unconditionally if only she'd allowed it. But mostly, I thought about the future, about the garden I was planning for next spring, about the literacy students who were making such progress, about Jessica's upcoming wedding, and the hope that maybe, someday, I'd have great-grandchildren who would know me not as a source of money, but as someone who loved them. I was finally living the life I'd always deserved. And it was beautiful. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.